Chris, let's start off right at the top here. The Memphis Grizzlies were like, oh, man, everybody disrespected us. They're trying to set it up so we don't make the playoffs. They have their fourth game today. I think it tips off as one of the first games. They may go 1-7 or 0-8, and instead of talking about them being in the playoff, I'm looking ahead and I'm like, I don't even see them in the 8-9 matchup. Am I crazy? Or do you also, having been watching these games in person, see the same thing materializing in the Western Conference?
I think it's certainly possible because, going into this, you can make an argument Memphis was being somewhat disrespected. There was the narrative about, getting Zion in Portland we've been talking about, but once this thing started and their team just fell apart, it's hard to look at them as being able to hold on to that number 8 seed. I mean, Justice Winslow was the first to go. Now it's Jaren Jackson Jr. They're only a game and a half up on Portland for that number 8 spot, and for them to have any chance of making the playoffs, they have to hold on to it because they're not going to go into a play-in situation as a number 9 seed and hope to beat Portland or New Orleans or any team that jumps them for that spot. So there's just too many games left on the slate for me to believe that Memphis can hold on. As much as I like Ja Morant, the consensus Rookie of the Year, he doesn't have enough help around him. So I can certainly see Portland and New Orleans jumping him. But honestly, this has been a weird restart. I mean, who thought Phoenix was going to go 3-0 to start this thing, beat the Clippers last night? I mean, San Antonio is one Shake Milton 3 away from being 3-0 themselves. It's been, as weird as it is to see 22 out of the 30 teams down here, it's looking like a smart decision by the NBA to have those 6 teams in the Western Conference battling it out for that one spot.
The quality of play has been really good. And now it may fade a little bit now that we have a lot of the top seeds sort of locked in more so than maybe they were when we started with the 8. And I also think, obviously, seeding is not of paramount importance necessarily. But would you agree with that the quality of play, to me, and I've watched a lot of these games, has been much better than I would have anticipated?
Well, it's been better offensively. I think defensively it stinks. And I don't think there's not a lot going on the defensive end of the floor look at how many games have finished under 100 points. Yeah. I don't know that there's more than a handful.
And we had one go over 300 in the total between the Mavs and the Rockets.
Yeah, I have a bunch of gambler friends who are making a killing betting the over and the money lines of these things. It's been a wild restart offensively, and maybe that comes back down to earth a little bit as players get into shape. I mean, defense has everything to do with conditioning. I've been a little bit surprised at how efficient teams have been from 3-point range. They're not great, but they've been a lot better than what I thought they were going to be. So, I mean, that's certainly a positive trend for the league to have these entertaining, high-scoring games, which always draw in more eyeballs than the reverse.
All right, let's go to the sort of the top of the line here. What have you thought of the Lakers' play so far through 3 games?
Yeah, it's been pretty good. I mean, Anthony Davis has been great. LeBron has been really good. Kyle Kuzma's had his moments. I think that the lingering issues surrounding the Lakers are still lingering. I mean, they're having to play Dion Waiters, who is a roller coaster ride in a 6'5" body, and you've got J.R. Smith, who is understandably incredibly rusty after not playing all season long. And because of their depleted backcourt with, Bradley gone and Rondo out for at least the foreseeable future, I mean, these guys, one of them is going to have to play and give them efficient minutes. Now, it's people kind of scoff at the notion that Portland could beat them in the first round, and I wouldn't bet on the Blazers, but, I mean, who defends that backcourt? I mean, if the Blazers get into the playoffs and it's Lillard and McCollum going up against Danny Green, Alex Caruso, and then whoever is behind them at that point, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope as well. I mean, that's a big advantage, for Portland there. So, look, I think LeBron is still LeBron. He came into this in great shape. Davis, looks like one of the top 3 players that's part of this restart. Dwight Howard has been fine. But a lot of what the Lakers do, their success, it might come down to Danny Green making shots and playing, championship-level defense. I mean, he has suddenly emerged as one of the real wild cards of this team and their ability to be successful.
What have you seen so far in terms of breaking down who you think will be meeting in the NBA Finals? So based on what you've seen, basically almost coming up on halfway in the bubble as we inch towards the playoffs, who would you assess as the best in the East and the best in the West?
Well, the Bucks are making people a little bit nervous, and it's possible that Milwaukee just doesn't care at this point. I mean, the Bucks may not play a meaningful game until September 1st. I mean, they really might not. I mean, they have these remaining seeding games, and you saw last night against Brooklyn, like they just don't care. Like they aren't going to play Giannis or Chris Middleton in that second half, and whoever they play in the first round, it's going to be a glorified scrimmage, when they go full bore, whether it's New Jersey or Washington, most likely, or Brooklyn rather, in that spot. So I wonder about the Bucks and how many open three-point shots that they give up, but they're not. This is a tough thing to read early on because of how inconsequential these games are. I'm fascinated in the Eastern Conference by Toronto. I really am. Like the fact that the Raptors are considered a title contender after losing Kawhi Leonard is remarkable, because the history in the NBA of teams after losing a player of that caliber is horrible. Whether it's Cleveland losing to LeBron, Chris Paul when he left New Orleans, the first time, Dwight Howard leaving Orlando, the list goes on. No team recovers from losing a player of that caliber. Not only Kevin Durant in Oklahoma City, another example. The Raptors not only have recovered, but they're a threat to win the East. And I'm going to watch them play again later today. Siakam has been great. The front court has been great. Kyle Lowry has been great. And that team, and Fred VanVleet for that matter, that team is just, really knows how to play as a team. And against a team like Milwaukee, who they've already beaten in the playoffs last year, I look at the Raptors maybe being the biggest threat to knock off the Bucks in the East.
One of the big stories, obviously, has been off the court in terms of, I say off the court, but they've got on the court Black Lives Matter. They have the social justice statements on jerseys and the kneeling before for the anthem and everything else. So that's been a huge story. I think it's honestly distracted from the play on the court, which has been pretty good. One thing I noticed this week was they've added the player names back to the back of the jersey. What do you know about that? Was that planned all along? Is the idea to phase out the messages on the jersey? How would you assess what the impact has been from the league and whether that's likely to continue into the playoffs?
No, I think that's always been a part of the plan to return or add names, I should say, to the jerseys. And I don't know for sure what the plan in the playoffs is with the messaging on the back of the jersey, but I would imagine if the players want it, it will continue, and it's pretty clear that they want it up until this point. I mean, look, I understand that to some it is a distraction, and the NBA, we've talked about this, like the NBA knows there's a portion of the fan base, of the public, that's not going to take well to this, that's going to push back on various parts of the social justice movement the players are involved in. But as I've said to you, I think before, this has all been factored into the accounting. Like the NBA knows that they'll lose some fans, they'll get some pushback, there'll probably be some stuff coming from the White House about it, but they've decided to cast their lot, with this side of the debate, and they believe that not only is it the right thing to do, but it's what their players, 80% of which are minority, ultimately support. So they'll live with whatever ratings dip comes from it. It's just going to be part of the whole process.
That's fascinating to me just from a pure business perspective. Let's just step back, right, and not even consider the politics angle on it. If somebody came to me and they said, hey, Clay, as a result of what you're doing on your radio show, you are losing 20% of your audience. Let's just toss it out there. I would be like, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. And I think almost every business out there, if you went to them and you said, hey, there's this decision that you are voluntarily making that is costing you 20% of your audience. Every business in America that is in a capitalistic business, they would all say, we're not going to do that. It seems like a really bad business decision to me, leaving aside whatever the politics are, right? You could embrace super conservative politics. You could embrace super liberal politics, whatever it is. If it costs me 20% of my business, and I think there's a decent chance that when all is said and done, the NBA is at least losing 20% viewership by what they're doing, that seems like an awful decision to me. Wouldn't, purely from a business perspective, And I can't even think of a precedent, you may be able to think of one, of any other business making that decision, which means it's, to me, just kind of without precedent and, frankly, crazy.
No,
in my
I
opinion.
can't think of anything comparable at this point. I just think that this is where the NBA stands, and they've decided not to move off it. Now, the bigger question, and look, the ratings, I'm sure taking a hit, but it's kind of hard to gauge because they are going to be on the higher side because of them coming back and they've been gone so long, and then the desire for, on some level, to watch NBA basketball. The question to me is going to be what happens next year, whenever next year starts. Will the NBA continue to allow players to express themselves during the national anthem? They've been reluctant and publicly resistant to that in the past. Will there be any accommodations when it comes to what they can wear on their jersey? I mean, the NBA, dating back to the David Stern days, in the early 2000s, they made some strong moves to kind of reshape the image of the league, whether it came to what players can wear on the bench, to what they can do during games. I mean, there are constant debates about, style of headbands. Recently, as a couple of years ago, guys were wearing those longer headbands during games. The NBA legislated that out, I think it was for the start of this season. So, I think this sort of what's happening in the bubble is a decision unto itself. Like they'll do whatever they have to do right now to get through the next 3 months of this resumed season. How they treat next year and beyond, I think, is the more interesting debate. That's when the finances might come more into play. That's when I think more different decisions might be made as a result of all this. Right now, this is kind of where they stand, and they're not going to move off it, regardless of what kind of business they might be losing.
What is the vibe inside of the bubble now that you have been there for a couple of weeks? Does it feel more relaxed? Does it feel more comfortable? Or is the tension kind of ratcheted up because you're like, man, yeah, this still sucks. I'm here. Like, does that make sense? Like, and how do you think it might be translating not just from the media, but to interpersonal relationships with teams, with the coaching? And the reason why I bring it up is you can't get away, right? Like, let's say you don't like your teammates or you get frustrated with your coaches. You can go home to the wife or the girlfriend. You can go play with the kids. You can kind of disappear. That isn't really an option in the bubble. How do you see that playing out, and does it feel different now a couple of weeks into you than it did maybe when you first got there?
It doesn't feel too much different as far as the vibe I'm getting from players that I've talked to, coaches that I've talked to. For coaches and front office members, keeping players mentally engaged remains an ongoing concern. And Eric Spoelstra was telling me this just the other day. Like, he talks to these guys every day about making sure you get out of your room, whether it's going to play golf, even if you suck at it, going to fish, even if you're terrible at it. Like, get out of your room and engage with your environment. The last thing they want these guys to do is to spend 12 hours a day playing Fortnite or Call of Duty, which, so many of them are want to do. And look, I spend most of my days in the lobby of the Coronado Springs, where the practice facilities are and where a number of the meal rooms are. And look, I see the looks on players' faces as they trudge back and forth between their room and the meal rooms. I mean, these rooms are sometimes their only escape. They've got like pinball games, arcade games in there to hang out with. They engage with their own teammates there. But up until this point, I don't think it's reached a tipping point where teams are really concerned. Now, there's still, for many teams, at least 4 weeks to go before they can theoretically get people into the bubble. So things could change pretty rapidly. But for right now, I think players are dealing with it. Teams are dealing with it. And there hasn't been, at least not from what I've heard, any kind of friction or real despondence, for lack of a better word, about being in the bubble.
What else should we know as we get ready for this weekend and we come up on the halfway point of the bubble that I haven't been smart enough to ask you about that you think would be interesting for fans to know as they roll into the weekend?
I don't know. I mean, if it's one specific thing, there are obviously players to watch when it comes to injury issues. Kemba Walker in Boston, to me, is one of the more fascinating guys. He's been slowly ramped up with his knee issues, and he's coming back. I just go back to the wild race in the Western Conference. I mean, the fact that Phoenix and San Antonio are good is remarkable. Like the Suns who have the youngest team in the NBA, are just playing out of their minds right now. Devin Booker, who a lot of people, myself included, believed was more of an empty calories type of player, is coming up with big shots and big moments, not the least of which is what he did against the Clippers last night. I mean, if I'm a fan of just watching random NBA basketball, I'd start tuning into these seeding games between the bottom 6 teams that are fighting for that last spot. I mean, they have been incredibly competitive and incredibly compelling, as every one of these teams knows that every single game in the standings counts. So, that's something that if you're looking, because I think when you get to the top of the bracket, Clay, you're going to have a lot of these teams start to rest guys. I mean, the Lakers are going to start to rest. The Bucks are going to start to rest. As the top 3 seeds kind of lock in their spots, they're going to start where you have several teams.
We can enjoy the bubble between.
You got it, Clay.
That's Chris Mannix at SI Chris Mannix.